Have you ever felt completely blindsided when someone you were connecting with suddenly disappeared? No warning, no closure, just silence. One day, you're texting, sharing, even laughing. The next, they vanish. No reply, no explanation, just a confusing void that leaves you questioning everything. Was it something I said? Did I come on too strong? Are they okay? Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and today we're diving into one of the most emotionally disorienting patterns in modern relationships, when someone with an avoidant attachment style ghosts you. And no, it's not because you're too much. And no, it's not because you imagined the connection. There's a reason they disappeared, and it's something they don't want you to know, because it would expose the emotional wall they hide behind and the fear that drives their distance. In this video, I'm going to break down why avoidantly attached people pull away right when things start to feel close, what their silence actually means, it's not the closure you think it is, and most importantly, how you can respond like someone who knows their worth, without begging, chasing, or self-abandoning. If you've ever felt like you're walking on eggshells just to keep someone from slipping away, this is for you. It's time to stop blaming yourself for someone else's emotional unavailability. Stick with me through this video, and if you're ready to stop guessing and start healing, make sure you subscribe. Your clarity starts now. One of the biggest reasons an avoidant person suddenly disappears is this: they're deeply uncomfortable with emotional confrontation, and not just the shouting match kind. We're talking any conversation where real feelings are brought to the surface. See, when someone has an avoidant attachment style, the moment emotions start to feel unpredictable or intense, their internal alarm bells go off. Why? Because emotional intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability means giving up control. Avoidants are wired to maintain emotional distance because closeness feels unsafe. So when a situation arises that might bring uncomfortable truths to light, like talking about unmet needs, misunderstandings, or even just defining where the relationship is headed, they don't see it as an opportunity for connection. They see it as a threat to their emotional autonomy, and more importantly, to their sense of control. Now, what makes this even more confusing is that it's not just your emotions they're afraid of, it's also their own. If they open the door to a hard conversation, they don't know how they'll react. Will they feel guilty? Will they get overwhelmed? Will they shut down or lash out? That unknown is terrifying to someone who has built their identity around staying emotionally in check. So rather than risk emotional chaos, many avoidants default to the one coping mechanism they've relied on their whole life: withdrawal. They ghost, they pull back, they go radio silent, not because you weren't worth the conversation, but because in their world, silence feels safer than showing up messy or unguarded. Of course, this doesn't make it right. Disappearing isn't a healthy way to navigate relationships, and you deserve open, honest communication. But understanding this pattern can help you stop taking their silence as a reflection of your worth and start seeing it for what it really is: their discomfort with emotional exposure. When someone avoids confrontation by disappearing, it's not a verdict on you, it's a reflection of their own emotional limits, and that's something you're not responsible for managing. Another major reason avoidants tend to ghost instead of giving you closure is because, truthfully, they don't know how to end things in a healthy, emotionally responsible way. They've never really learned what it means to bring a relationship to a respectful, compassionate close. For them, safe means silent. Disappearing feels like the lesser evil compared to having a vulnerable conversation where someone might cry, get angry, or ask for answers they don't feel equipped to give. A big part of this comes down to emotional modeling, or the lack of it. Many avoidantly attached individuals grew up without seeing mature emotional communication in action. They weren't taught how to sit with discomfort, how to hold space for someone else's feelings without shutting down, or how to say, "This isn't working," without running for the hills. So when it comes time to exit a relationship, even gently, their nervous system sees that as a threat. Conflict, even in its softest form, feels overwhelming. And it's not just about fearing your reaction, it's about fearing their own. The uncertainty of what they might feel in the process Guilt, shame, regret, even the possibility of emotional pain can be enough to send them into flight mode. So they rationalize their exit as the cleanest option, disappear before it gets messy. But here's the truth. Cutting off communication without explanation doesn't protect anyone. It leaves the other person confused, questioning their worth, and tangled in unresolved emotion. Still, to someone who has spent their whole life avoiding deep connection, ghosting feels less terrifying than facing the emotional impact of goodbye. This isn't to excuse their behavior, but to help you understand that their disappearance says more about their emotional limitations than your value. If they never learned how to end things with integrity, they'll keep vanishing when things get real. And that's not something you can fix. It's something you can recognize and walk away from with your dignity intact. Another key reason why avoidant individuals often disappear instead of engaging in a real conversation is because they anticipate that you will have an emotional reaction, and that deeply unsettles them. In their mind, any display of strong feeling, whether it's sadness, frustration, or a plea for clarity, feels like too much. They assume you'll become overly attached, overly expressive, or just bring a wave of emotion they don't feel ready to deal with. And for someone who's already uncomfortable with intimacy, the idea of being on the receiving end of that kind of raw emotion is something they want to sidestep at all costs. It's not that your emotions are wrong or unreasonable. In fact, if you've developed a real connection with someone, even one that's been rocky, it's completely human to want closure, to express hurt, or even to hope for repair. That doesn't make you needy, it makes you emotionally present. But for someone with an avoidant style, the moment things start to feel emotionally charged, their instinct isn't to lean in and connect, it's to pull back and protect themselves. Because here's the truth, they're not just afraid of what you might feel. They're afraid of what they might feel in response. Guilt, pressure, discomfort, even vulnerability. They don't have the emotional tools to process those states in a healthy way. So rather than risk that inner chaos, they opt for silence. They hope that by not responding, they can skip the part where things get too real. But emotional connection always involves risk. That's the price of real intimacy. You open up and you don't always get to predict what will come next. And while you may be ready to show up and work through hard feelings, the avoidant person is often stuck in survival mode, thinking less about the health of the relationship and more about how they can avoid feeling exposed. So if you've ever been left hanging, wondering why someone couldn't even give you a few honest words before walking away, just remember, it wasn't because your emotions were too much, it's because they didn't know how to handle them, yours or their own. And that's not your burden to carry. This brings us naturally to a core truth about avoidant behavior, one that often goes unnoticed but drives so much of the pain. When they ghost you, it's not just a disappearance, it's an attempt to regain control. In their world, pulling away without a word gives them the upper hand. They don't have to explain, they don't have to feel, and they certainly don't have to navigate the emotional terrain of a real conversation. It becomes a kind of silent strategy, where they exit the situation on their own terms, free from the vulnerability of connection or accountability. What's more confusing is that they often convince themselves they're doing you a favor. In their mind, skipping the conversation, the emotions, the messiness, that's mercy. They think, if I just fade away, maybe it'll be easier for them too. But what they don't realize is that this kind of exit leaves a gaping wound. It robs you of closure, of clarity, and of the basic respect you deserve after investing time, energy, and emotional presence into the relationship. To them, though, all of those uncomfortable things, clarity, confrontation, vulnerability, are territory they're not equipped to navigate. So instead of showing up, they disappear and rationalize it as the cleanest solution. But underneath that, what's really happening is emotional self-protection. They've learned to avoid anything that might threaten their emotional equilibrium, and that includes being seen, being held accountable, or being touched by another person's pain. But here's the hard truth. This isn't because you were too much. It's because they never learned how to stay present when things get emotionally real. Often raised in environments where emotional needs were dismissed or ignored, avoidant individuals built internal belief systems that said, "Connection is risky, control keeps me safe." So when things start to get deep, when intimacy knocks on the door, they reach for the only tool they trust: distance. And while they might think that slipping away quietly is harmless, it's actually a symptom of emotional avoidance that leaves the other person carrying the weight of everything unsaid. The sad irony is, in their attempt to protect themselves, they often end up causing the very kind of emotional damage they were trying to avoid all along. And then there's one more pattern you need to be aware of, one that often catches people off guard. The avoidant doesn't always disappear for good. In fact, many of them come back around, but only when they feel emotionally safe again. This isn't about resolution or growth, it's about timing. For them, stepping away creates space, not just for themselves to avoid discomfort, but in the hope that time will do the emotional labor for them. They believe that if enough time passes, the tension will dissolve on its own and you'll both just naturally fall back into place. No need for hard conversations or working through what actually went wrong. In their mind, you'll have moved on from the emotional impact, you'll no longer be upset, and most importantly, you'll still be there when they feel ready to re-engage. To them, emotional distance is a reset button, and so they may circle back acting like the rupture never happened, hoping to resume the connection without having to address what was left unspoken. But here's what you need to remember. Real relationships don't heal through silence. They heal through honesty, effort, and mutual accountability. What makes this cycle so painful is that it often repeats. An avoidant may retreat, return, reconnect, only to retreat again the moment vulnerability resurfaces. It becomes a loop of closeness and withdrawal that leaves you stuck in emotional limbo. And unless they've done deep inner work to understand and shift their attachment pattern, that cycle is likely to continue. Now, are there avoidants who recognize this pattern, take responsibility, and actively work to change it? Yes, absolutely. Growth is possible, but you can't wait around hoping someone might evolve. You have to decide what's emotionally sustainable for you. Your peace can't hinge on someone else's emotional availability finally catching up. So if you're caught in that push-pull cycle, know this: their return isn't always a sign of love. It might just be a sign that they feel comfortable again. And there's a big difference between someone who comes back to do the work and someone who comes back to avoid it all over again. Let's talk about one of the most confusing and emotionally misleading things that avoidantly attached people do. They often come back, but only after they've had enough time to feel emotionally safe again. You might think the silence meant it was over, but in many cases, they're not gone forever. They're simply hitting pause on intimacy, hoping that when they return, the slate will be clean. Avoidants often believe that emotional distance solves emotional problems. Instead of working through the discomfort of conflict, they hope time will somehow reset the dynamic. Like putting a strained relationship in the freezer and hoping it thaws out better than before. In their minds, emotional space equals clarity, when in reality it's just avoidance in disguise. They also operate under the assumption that you'll still be there when they're ready to reconnect. They think if I just give it time, they'll calm down, forget the hard stuff, and we can go back to how things were. This isn't malicious, it's just how their emotional system has been conditioned to survive. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect themselves from vulnerability. But the problem is they do it at your expense. And here's where it gets especially difficult. When they return, they often act like nothing happened. They may message you casually, test the waters with a "Hey, how have you been?" or even suggest meeting up like everything's normal. They're not trying to be manipulative, they just don't want to go near the emotional weight of what really happened. They're hoping proximity will rebuild the bond, rather than conversation and accountability. But real relationships don't work that way. You can't just skip the messy middle and pick up where you left off. If you've been on the receiving end of this pattern, you probably feel emotionally whiplashed, like your heart is always waiting, but never landing. What's important to understand is that this cycle, pull away, come back, avoid the hard stuff, repeat, isn't just a quirk. It's an emotional defense mechanism rooted in their early attachment experiences. Many avoidants grew up in environments where vulnerability was punished, ignored, or unsafe. So now, as adults, they unconsciously recreate that safety by controlling closeness. And disappearing is the ultimate form of control. Does that mean they're incapable of change? No. With self-awareness and real effort, avoidants can grow and develop the capacity to tolerate intimacy, repair ruptures, and engage in emotionally mature relationships. But you can't do that work for them, and waiting around in silence for someone to choose emotional availability keeps you stuck in a dynamic where your needs are constantly on hold. So when they come back, the real question isn't will they reach out again? The question is, will they come back willing to grow? If the answer is no, then giving them another chance may just be giving your peace away. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you, truly. It means you're not just looking for answers, but healing. Understanding why an avoidant partner ghosts you isn't about blaming them. It's about reclaiming your clarity, your self-worth, and your power to choose relationships that feel safe, reciprocal, and emotionally real. You deserve connection that doesn't leave you questioning your value. So if this video helped you see things more clearly, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'm here to walk with you through the hard truths and toward the kind of love you don't have to chase. And if you feel called, drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, your story, or simply what resonated most. Your voice matters here, and your growth is worth every step.